Hello and welcome to the show, And If Love Remains. I'm your host, Mike Levitt, and we have arrived. This is the fourth and final part of our exploration of Mussorgsky's pictures at an exhibition. I recorded this with Dr. Elias-Axel Pettersson. Very grateful to him and his generosity, not only in his time, which was immense, but also, we have 4 hours of just gold, but also his willingness to share his this music that you're listening to comes from his recording. So we're grateful to him for permission to do that.
Was a good pianist, and he knew what was possible, and he does give you a little bit of reprieve in the way that he changes the chord positions when they're doubled. So you might only do 4 in one position, 4 in another, so you get a little bit of a change to make it a little bit more flowing, a little bit easier, but it's still a big challenge. And then that ends in a big flurry, and that goes immediately to the catacombs.
Right.
And this next one is actually the original title is in Latin. So again, we were talking about influences of cultures and languages. I forgot if Mussorgsky uses 5 or 6 languages titles for this piece, but this is Catacombe Sepulchrum Romanum. So this is a Roman sepulcher catacomb, which would have been, there are a lot of catacombs in France and Italy.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever visited. I've got to see some of the catacombs when I was. Wow. I can't remember if it was when we went to Europe we used to go to Sweden every couple summers back in the 80s. Much cheaper to travel. But then one summer we went on a small tour. It was about 3 weeks actually, but we got to see a number of cities. Only spent maybe days. But I did get to see the catacombs, and I don't remember if it was in Rome or in Paris. And they were just amazing. I'd read about them, I'd seen, and I was actually a little scared. I'm not claustrophobic per se, but when you're underground in tombs, and you're seeing where people were buried, and it just little lights on the wall, and everything's old and dusty, and they're blocked. It was a little scary. I was 12 at the time. So,
Well, I am not 12, and that would probably give me a few chills. That's for sure.
Yeah. So this is another vignette that is based on an image that we have, and it's of this watercolor, and it's impressionistic in a way. You see sort of that light coming through. It's not as realist. it leaves a lot to the imagination. And I think that's very telling for this. He just really translated that uncertainty of the painting, of the imagery, of the story that surrounds the catacombs in this piece. You've got the tremolo opening octaves really. Tremolo comes a little bit later, but it's just eerie, and the intervallic relationship has in the piece, the jumps, the diminished fifths, the random leaps. It's like death is very uncertain. And I think all the character that would surround that imagery is really infused into music.
Yeah. And you do hear that. You do hear, and it's interesting as I listen to it. It's almost a lot of times when we think of death, it's almost like this doom and gloom. I don't get that exact feeling when I listen to this. It's more I don't know if I would call it hopeful.
Towards the end, yeah.
Yeah, towards the end, but it is the darkness does come at the beginning, and then it does lighten it up, and it feels inevitable and almost comfortable in a way.
Yeah, it's weird. He also does a lot with the light, what I would say the lighting effect. So when we talk about music,
Yes.
we often use words from the visual arts. We talk about color and harmony, for example. What does that come from? And when we say chromaticism, chroma, that comes from color as well. But he does a lot with the dynamics and the voicing and the shadings, to try to give that imagery of, echoing maybe in the catacomb. You say something like travel. So at the beginning, you fortissimo of D, and that's with the fermata, and it's largo. It's very slow, ponderous, and then you got a G right below that, and it's major third. So you're like, is this major? But it doesn't sound major. It's sort of eerie. You don't have any notes to fill in, so you have nothing to go by. There's no point of reference. So is it really in D minor? Is it really in G major? You're not sure. And that's at piano. So fortissimo all the way, and it dies down. I actually let it die down to basically where piano is, and then I play the piano. And then he writes a G an octave higher, and he puts a crescendo on the dotted half note. Which is impossible.
Which is impossible.
This is what Liszt does in his sonata at the very end. He writes a crescendo on a single note, which you can't do on the piano. But the idea is, can you? Maybe you can do something physically with a gesture, or mentally have that idea that it's growing, even though it's not. And that way, the note that you play next will be in that progression or lineage. It's very interesting that he would write something like that, and this is I'm trying to think when Liszt Sonata was written. It might have been around this time, actually. Let's see. Liszt was born in 1811. So yeah, it could have been around this, maybe a little bit before, because they died in similar years. Liszt died in 1886. So anyhow, he goes a lot through these different dynamic, and he has almost every measure. I'm looking at this score right now. Up to the first double bar line where there's rest, every measure has some indication of a dynamic or and so it's very interesting how particular he was. How all the
he wanted a specific effect to take place, and this is exactly how he wanted it.
Yeah, he really calculated that out, and I think one of the best pianists that does this. This movement is really tied in and connected with the conmortuus. But I think Pletnev does a wonderful job of really bringing that eerie side, but also showing.
I'm sorry, say that one more time. Who is it?
Pletnev. So McGehee Pletnev. He's spelled P-L-E-T-N-E-V, Pletnev, but it's pronounced Pletnev. Okay. He does a phenomenal job of bringing out the characters in this. And when I remember first hearing his recording, I thought, is he playing piano there? When the conmortuus comes in with the tremolos. Like the effects that he does with the pedaling is very important. Talk about pianistic techniques, and so we often overlook things like articulation and pedaling. I was just talking with Jess the other, Jess, also a piano, and so we always lament sort of what are things that are overlooked in teaching, and pedaling is one of those.
Oh yes.
And I actually did, for my master's degree, we had different papers. I didn't have a thesis, but I did take a course. My major research topic was piano pedaling. And there's an excellent book by Joseph Horowitz, not related to Vladimir Horowitz, but Joseph Banowitz. I'm thinking there's a Joseph Horowitz who's a writer, Joseph Banowitz, and he's a teacher in Texas. Or I don't know if he's retired now, but he has a book entitled The Art of Pedaling. Quite a fascinating book, but this is to say that pedaling is very important because we don't have sustaining qualities of pianists like string instruments, wind instruments do. Once you play a note, that's it. You can't increase the volume really. There are subtle ways when you look at overtones, but the pedal is one of the most useful techniques.
It's the hardest to show. Like it's the hardest to you almost have to get the student down on their stomach and it's very difficult to do it right.
Yeah, it's very hard to teach pedaling. We also, there are two different, I don't want to say schools of thought, but types of pedaling, and one was used a long time ago, a little before Mussorgsky's time. We call that direct pedaling. That was more Chopin or a little earlier. And what we use today ubiquitously is the overlapping pedaling or syncopated pedaling, where you play a note and you change right after. You kind of minimize the bleeding of the note, but that way they're connected. Direct pedaling, you end up getting sort of pickups on the downbeats or the harmony changes. But this piece, I found when I played it, I really experimented a lot with pedaling, not just full, but we say half pedaling or quarter pedaling, just different gradations of how much I let the pedal off and how much I let certain bass notes, let's say, ring a little bit longer. And I think you can do a lot with the overall sound shape that you want to create at every moment. So that's it's an easy piece from the standpoint of the notes, but I think interpretively, this is a very difficult piece to pull off well.
Yeah, I think, pedaling. Sorry, you've got me like on the brain of pedaling, and thinking how I pedal and how I use it as a almost
how you perform and how you teach it too.
How I perform, when I play, I use it almost as a I can't even think of the word. It's almost Anyway, I'm actually going to skip through this part. I'm going to edit this part, that little bit out.
No, it's great. I mean, this is good reflection too. I mean, we talked about a lot of different pieces. I know in your teaching, you do consider pedaling, and I know certain things you've played, like the Mozart or whatever. What is the rondo or whatever? That's something very difficult to pedal.
It's very hard. Well, and you talk about like one thing that I remember when we did go over the Mozart is, the idea of having making sure as you're playing a whole note, or as you're playing a longer note, making sure that if there's a reason that note is that length, and the rest of the accompaniment around it needs to reflect that. So you could play something forte, but by the end of that measure, if that note's a whole note, for example, you need to be able to bring the rest of the accompaniment down in order to reflect that it's still a forte, almost like a magician. And I think about that, that's what I was thinking of as you're talking about these notes that were crescendoing on notes that can't be crescendoed on. How that would reflect the rest of the accompaniment surrounding it.
Right. I mean,
whether that's either to get louder, to get more intense, or to get softer so that note sounds louder,
Yeah. So you bring up a lot of things. First and foremost is voicing. And that's going to always be, in tandem with the pedaling. So they affect each other. On some of these measures, he marked diminuendo, which that's going to naturally occur anyway. Crescendo is the difficult part, but when you have other inner voices working, like you said, you have to imagine what's important. You have to have the strata, what is your priority, maybe the melody, maybe a bass next, and then the accompaniment or the filler, the harmonic fillers next. And that all has to be in relation to what that melody is that you want to bring out. And then if you have a long note, like you said, that lasts the whole measure, it might start at forte, but by the end of the measure, it might be down to mezzo, forte, piano. So the following melodic note needs to take that into consideration, and the rest of the strata, the rest of the levels as well. So piano is very complex because of that, because of the multiple levels going on. All instruments have their challenges, but that's one that I feel pianists really have to deal and struggle with that most other instruments don't. I mean, you can play multiple notes on a guitar, a chord, on a violin as well. I guess if you're talking about multiphonics, you can do that on flute and wind instruments, but it's
not the same.
So many things, 10 fingers, and sometimes I've had chords that have more than 10 notes, so you have to figure out like 2 notes with the thumb. And that's just one of our challenges, but it's a wonderful challenge.
It is. And when it's done properly, it's just glorious.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can have a good pedaling with that, that's why Horowitz was so well respected. People think of him just for his, non-musician maybe, just his pyrotechnic, but actually his very deft pedaling and the way he combines sounds. Like if you listen to his Schubert Impromptu, the Opus 90 number 3 B flat major, which I've recorded and performed a lot. It's probably the piece I've performed the most in my life. And he has a number of recordings. One of them is from a Carnegie Hall concert, I think after like a 12-year hiatus. But it's so beautiful and so nuanced and subtle, the color changes and the voicings that he does. I wouldn't play it like he does, but it's just magical. And that's what makes it so special, the voicing and that incredible pedaling.
That's great. That makes me want to go check it out right now.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Listen to it.
So we go right into the con mortuis.
Yeah, con mortuis in lingua mortua. Now, this is Mussorgsky was obviously fluent in French and Russian. His Latin apparently was not quite up to par. So the title is slightly wrong. I'm not a Latin, so this I looked up, but it should be cum mortuis. CUMMORTUIS. Con. Con is like French con moto, or even Spanish con este. But this would have been CUM, not CON. But whatever, just a small mistake there. These are the whitened skulls, basically. The light coming through the whitened skulls in the catacomb. So instrument is basically standing with his architect friend, Kennel, K-E-N-E-L, and light is coming through this. And that's represented, that light, sort of, what I'm saying for the impressionistic, coloristic thing, is very high F-sharp tremolo. I have heard some pianists do this configuration where it's very measured 16th notes. I think I alluded to this before, where it's bum, 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 bum.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the last podcast.
Yeah, and I can't remember the pianist now that does that. There are a couple that I've heard, and I can't remember right now, but it's very effective. But it's written as a tremolo. And what Pletnev does in this is amazing, how he kind of enters with that light sort of emanates and then spreads over everyone. It's such a magical moment. But basically, under that shimmering atmosphere, shall we say, the promenade theme. This is where I was talking about before. We have that last structural promenade in the middle of the piece, and that's
right.
Still a viewer of the exhibition. Now Mussorgsky starts to put the viewer into the vignettes themselves. So you become part of those whitened skulls, or you're one of the dead walking amongst the skulls. And so that promenade theme enters in B minor, first of all. So it's in a minor, and it's in the low bass register. And it just kind of barely enters, and then you realize, oh yeah, we're walking through, but wait a second, what is all this shimmering light around?
Right.
Are we part of this whole charade, or charade? It's very beautifully done.
Oh yeah, and you did mention that, and that when I went back and listened to it again, I just thought that is just absolutely brilliant, because it brings you in and you become part of the art. You're not watching, you're not listening, you're like part of the piece itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you start to see some of the other influences too in this piece. So the religious overtone really come in there in the beginning, or towards the beginning, measures 11 and 12. Mussorgsky introduces what one could hear as church bells, and this was suggested in the promenade, one of the earlier promenades, by these ringing chords in the upper register. Here, they're sort of like large gongs as well, and you have to imagine that in Russia, the Russian Orthodox Church would have had a strong influence in Russian culture, and you have those capelas with the big bells and ringing over the countryside. He certainly would have put these in, and later they show up in the great KHFM move, which is the last movement, these bells. So I think it's starting to really enter here in a conscious way. Perhaps earlier in the promenade, it was in a subconscious or unconscious way, but now he's really starting to layer everything together, slowly but surely. It's sort of like you don't realize what he's doing. He's crafting this whole thing, and you're being put into it, and he's starting to bring these influences from before and connect to something coming later, and you're just caught up. You're just caught up in it.
Now, this is also, I mean, it's interesting because we're in the catacombs, is this also, I'm reminded that this is a piece about a person who has just recently passed away, a friend of his. And we're talking a lot of death motifs here.
Oh, yeah. There's certainly a tie into that. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure he was just very effective. This con mortuus, the English translation, with the dead in a dead language. Even that's like Latin.
Oh, wow. That's so true.
Language.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and here's his dead friend that they're honoring with this. And there's some sort of light and there's hope. And it's like, we're still celebrating. It's like a celebration in a way of this brutal, he had a brain aneurysm. I think he was like 40-something years. He's young guy.
And we'll get to this part, but it is interesting that the last part of this is a gate. We're talking about the gate, and we get into that. But I do find that almost a continuation of that same motif of this moving through and into the next life.
Yeah, the symbolism here is very powerful, I think.
Right. Yeah. So before we move into the Baba Yaga. Anything else you want to add about this little piece?
No, I would just say
that little.
yeah. These two together kind of definitely check out Pletnev's recording. I can't say enough about that's the part of that recording that really drew me to it and made me love it.
Okay.
So.
Right on. Well, we'll have to, please go listen to it. After you listen to,
after you listen to my version.
Oh, no, it's
I like
good.
my version too. Actually,
it's very good.
Yeah, thank you. I actually like my newer, in a way, my newer version better. And I'll send you, I don't have a CD release of that because actually I had a couple mistakes that I didn't like in the live performance, but I do have a DVD performance of that.
Okay.
And it's not on YouTube or something, anything like that, but I can send you that to you.
Oh, I'd love to see it.
Sure.
So now, and this is interesting because to me, because we've it's like, it's gotten solemn, and then we have this amazing piece. So I want you to describe this next vignette.
Sure. I think this is one of the first times we get real ferocity here. I mean, maybe we had a little bit with Nomis, but so far we've had like the different characteristics, drudgery and sort of just plugging along at your daily routine. And then we've had the children at play and the marketplace, the busyness, and we've had the very sadness of the cor mortuus and happy and sad, it seems. And here we have ferocious. I mean, Baba Yaga, we don't know who this is. This is a very wicked witch. Of course, all cultures have sort of that witch motif and the wickedness and the good. We have in Dorothy with the Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West, and blah, blah, blah. So in this one, Baba Yaga is actually a figure in Russian literature, and she's there in the fairy tales, folklore, to scare children. She basically rides around, not on a broom. She rides around on a mortar and pestle, so she can capture children and grind their bones and eat them in her soup. I mean, you don't get any more crazy and scary.
That's pretty dark. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's dark. And so she rides around on this hut. Apparently her hut is supported on 4 chicken feet and fat and human bones, and she eats human bones, I should say, which she grinds up with her mortar and pestle, and that's what she uses to fly through the air. So actually Hartman designed a clock in the form of the Baba Yaga hut. It's a very ornate clock. And that is one of the images that we still have. Whether or not it was a direct influence on this piece, we don't know, but at least part of that folkloric tradition was upheld. And
right.
It actually, that object, and now I'm reading some of my notes, it maybe is Slavic or Victorian in a way. It might appear quite modern, or it would appear that way to modern eyes. But it was really like a 14th century clock, and it was made of bronze and enamel. So the fairy tale with Baba Yaga, this right hand chirp-like fragment, yum, 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 is like the ballet of the unhatched chick that we talked about. And the mortar and pestle, which represents probably in measure 33. So let me get out my score here and go to measure 3. Let's see here. Yeah. Bum, 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 bum. So you have that grinding thing in the left hand. And just that incessantness, like we got in the beat whoa, that incessant thing. But this is just repeating. Bum, 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 and with that melody, kind of the shriekingness of that witch as she rides over the countryside must be terrifying. And yeah, it's just
it is like the Wicked Witch and Dorothy. You know that.
Yeah, it has that. I mean, even the way he writes the beginning, after you end the Con Mort twist, it's that hopeful, shimmering. It's D major. You have the entire keyboard, and you're like, oh, bing! You kind of have this bell-like thing at the end with a fermata, and then you have 2 very big notes, bum bum, from an F sharp to a G, a major 7th leap, which is a very dissonant leap, and it's going down into one of the lowest registers, piano, and even in the indications, he says allegro con brio, with fire, and feroce or feroce. This is ferocious.
Ferocious.
And so it's bum bum, rest, and then you're like, whoa, what's going on? What happened? Like you're watching that horror movie, and it's like, don't open that door. There's something behind it. Get out of the house, And they open it, and it's silent.
Well, is this I sometimes when you're talking about art, it's hard to not turn into a psychologist or something like that. But do you think it's possible he's using this piece, using that particular piece of art? I just find it fascinating where he puts it in the work, and it's almost like he's using that as a medium to deal with his anger about this early death of his friend.
Maybe I hadn't thought of that tie-in, but it could be. Certainly from a structural point of view, the last movement, the Great Gate, is one of the biggest, and that's grandiose and triumphant. And I think to juxtapose this with, to show the disparity between the two, this was probably the best place to put something like this, where it's just so not negative, but I guess
dark. It's the opposite of triumphant.
Yeah, it's the opposite of that. So I think in that way, structurally, it works. I also think that you've had so much buildup and so much angst and anxiety kind of building up too, that this is a release.
That's so true.
Maybe it's good to have that release after his friend dying, and having those 2 very introspective and personal movements or vignettes. And then all of a sudden, like, you just got to release that energy, and he used the fairy tale, the folkloric Baba Yaga to do that. Bringing as many different things together.
And it's interesting. It takes. You think about that as a child. It's childish almost. It's that just like, we're talking about something pretty somber, pretty solemn, and even if it is lighter, and then it just it hits you like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. This is also a very difficult piece to play.
I was just going to ask. This doesn't sound like an easy.
No, some of the jumps when you get to the second, once the theme comes in of the wheeling, dun 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 dun, and then you have bum 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 bum. You have the left hand where it's jumping a lot, it's different octaves, and the right hand's jumping sometimes in contrary motion, parallel motion, and to line those things up, very difficult. And then
it's also long.
It's long. Yeah, so the stamina is another issue. And then you've got a whole passage of kind of octaves cascading downwards and getting a little lower each time. And then he goes right back up, and you have this alternating right hand, left hand, until you just kind of peter out a little bit, sort of like the lull before the storm comes in. And this middle section, again, this is sort of a ternary form, with the andante mosso part. This is in measure 95. So bum, 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 bum. So still some weird intervals. That's A sharp E, which is an augmented fourth or tritone. And then it's still kind of weird, but you're kind of in the limbo zone. And that's similar to her theme, or some things that come previously, but it's just a much more calming effect. And then you have these little outbursts in the second iteration of this, so I can measure 108. Bum, 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 bum. You have these like sparks of light coming. Maybe if it's a magical thing, it's like a wand, right. The sparks at the end of a wand, if she's a magical witch, which she probably is. So
fun.
Yeah, and then da-dum, it kind of ends and peters out again to that. Pianissimo, diminuendo, and it's a tremolo with a fermata. And then you go right back to the original version or original theme kind of. But in this case, you don't have pum pum. You just have one pum. And I don't know if he wants you to wait for the other one or not, but it doesn't come. And then bum bum. Like, oh,
a little arrested development there.
yeah, exactly. So then he gets back into the same kind of theme, and it ends on this huge, very difficult actually flourish that leads up very triumphantly. So into the upper registers with both hands, harmonic minor scale almost, and then leads to E flat major. this key, you know, we have to keep in mind back then, and certainly even earlier in Haydn and Beethoven's time, keys had different meanings because they didn't have equal temperament. So, I mean, Bach wrote the Preludes and Fugues to kind of highlight the fact that you could have equal temperament and everything could sound good in different keys. But before that, keys had meaning. So, for example, D major was a hunting key. A lot of pieces that are hunting songs are written in that. E flat was a very good key for triumphal stuff because E flat is a natural pitch for horns. So when you think of the natural horn, you know, over the countryside, E flat, B flat, those are very good notes. And so anytime you have something that's princely or kingly, you know, they're often in the key of E flat. So that's kind of another reason for choosing that particular key for it's called the Bogatyr Gate, or at Kiev, the ancient capital. This is also in Russian, this original title, which I won't read anymore because my Russian is I've forgotten some of the letters, actually. It's embarrassing. I could read it fluently a number of years ago, and now I cannot.
We'll just call it the Gate of Kiev.
The Gate, yeah, Great Gate of Kiev. So, so let's just skip to that.
Yeah, that's just I mean, and I one of the things that I appreciate about this, it is very triumphal. It is definitely the ending, and he uses the promenade. I mean, I hear motifs of the promenade going on through it.
Yes. Yeah, he definitely brings in the promenade theme, and it's in a very positive manner. You have so many layers in this piece. First of all, it's a large piece. And so he starts out with this da, 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 which is a very just open, fifths. We talk about the Russian singing over the countryside, like I mentioned at the beginning with the promenades. This is another very vocal theme. It's amazing, some of these other nationalistic pieces of other countries. They always sound so good to me. Sometimes I wish American composers could match that. I don't know if you've heard the Russian national anthem.
Yes.
It's just so glorious.
It is. It is beautiful.
Yeah, and so they have this. This is kind of the glory of the Russian singing, and
that reminds me of Rachmaninoff and his Vespers, and people, which I love. I mean, that's some of my favorite music to listen to, and he's and I remember they were talking about how the basses go down to like a B below. I mean, it's so low, it's impossibly low. And he said something to the effect of, "I believe in my Russian men can hit that note," and they do. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard the Mongolian throat singers.
Yes, yeah,
it's amazing how low one can go. But Russia, they had a real focus on the lower singing, like I was talking about with Mussorgsky's other works. They're often dark.
It's very manly and
very just broad. And so that's what I feel the character of this is at the beginning. Da, 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 da. And then actually after this is reiterated a couple times, it gets bigger and bigger. And then later on it gets even bigger and starts to add layers, which we'll get into. But he actually in measure 30, he introduces this Russian Orthodox church hymn. I didn't know this or grow up with this. I don't know this song. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called "As You Are Baptized in Christ," and that apparently was maybe a hymn that was in a lot of the Russian Orthodox churches.
Right.
He kind of expands on that. I have in my thesis. This is on page 80. It's figure 22 if you're following along. But there's the just outline of the melody for it, and he emulates the simpler aspect of chant, kind of taking away a lot of the melismatic features, because in that tradition and even earlier, like Gregorian chant, you'd have a lot of around one note. So he kind of shears it down or pares it down with elements, and that's what is presented here. So
wow.
That kind of thing. It's really beautiful, and I love it because
I didn't realize that was in there, and that's I do love that part because it sounds religious in nature,
Yeah, and it's in a weird key. It's actually very hard to read this section. Not so hard to play per se, but it's in A flat minor, and so you've got some double
some
flats
C
that you're
flats.
reading. Yeah, and you also just finished this section at forte, and then this enters a piano, and it's sort of like innocent, and it is called As You Are Baptized in Christ. So again, it's bringing that sort of the allusion to the innocent baby in the manger kind of thing, and the purity of the sound, and it's open, very open sound, but closed chords or close chords, but very pure sounding. And the progressions, again, it's more like Gregorian almost. It's not, I don't know, it doesn't sound quite Germanic all the time, just a lot of parallel things.
Well, and if you and the symbolism again, I come back to is the gate. The for Christianity, the gate to Christ is baptism. That is that first
Yes.
initial thing, and when we die, that entering the gates of heaven. I mean, I just see a lot of symbolism going on there, especially with those Russian Orthodox hymns and those as you say, those not polyphonic kind of things going on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. I mean, some of it is overt in the symbolism, and some of it might not be, maybe more covert. But certainly, Mussorgsky, although I wouldn't say he was a very religious type, we don't read much about that in his what we do have of his life. But he probably couldn't escape from that part of his culture. That was just imbued in the culture.
Right.
So it's always going to color what he thinks about. It's always going to affect his mindset. And in this way, he does it in such a beautiful way. So anyway, after that little interlude, which does come back in another key, by the way, and it comes back in E flat minor. So we're A flat minor to E flat minor. But he first has this large, da 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 da, triumphal kind of, almost like bells ringing, but just a large scalar passage with the Great Gate theme underneath, so in the bass.
Right.
And it's just beautifully written. Now, here's a place too where I can't remember in my recording if I added or changed some of the octaves or the direction of the octaves, but I mentioned Horowitz's recording from Carnegie Hall, and he did a lot of rewritings or translations, if you want, or transcriptions in this piece. But here's one instance where he did change a lot. There is another version of Mussorgsky where he altered the direction of the scale, or he had some jumps in there. I think Horowitz uses part of that, and then he adds some things here and later on as well to kind of thicken the texture. But it almost is a different piece when Horowitz plays it. And so when I first recorded it, and you hear it in this recording, I don't quite follow the score. I do add a few things myself as well. And when I re-recorded it and re-performed it or performed it again, I took some of that out and try to keep that character while playing more of the original version of the Mussorgsky wrote. So yeah, this is an interesting place, and that's why I love looking at the manuscript, because you see an artist at work and you see his thought process in real time. You see him cross something out or mark something out in pen. Sometimes it's colored, like a blue pen, and then he'll because they didn't have computers, he'll rewrite it or paste another piece of manuscript paper over it, and redo a section. It's pretty interesting. Wow. And so some people want to revisit those. Sometimes you can't tell. I mean, it was really inked out black. You can't tell what was written underneath.
But sometimes you can take a guess.
Yeah, and some people want to bring back those sections or play it with the original, version or whatever.
How did Ravel compare and contrast like what Ravel did with his orchestration on this piece?
Yeah, well, I don't think they by this time what Rimsky-Korsakov, he didn't really amend too much here. This one follows most of the rules. It does pretty well.
Right.
But certainly how he chose to orchestrate it was very interesting. And I can't, I have not studied the Ravel orchestration for a long time. I don't remember which instruments play what, but there's such a variety here in character and timbre and register that he really uses the orchestra to the full effect. And on the same, on the same idea, Mussorgsky, I think, used the piano to its greatest or maximum effect. Well, trying to use as many different possibilities and types of ways to play, and getting just that ringing quality. There are certain sections here where I just leave the pedal down for quite a while, even though some of the harmonies change. But there's a difference between a harmony changing in the upper register, because you don't have it. You can't hear the human ear cannot hear the overtones above that. So there's not as much what is it called, interference. So you can leave the pedal down, for example, in the upper register, whereas if you do that in the lower register, you can't. That's why bass drums always sound so just boomy, because of what we're actually hearing are all the overtones. And so in this piece, you can get away with that because the lower register or the chords, he either has a chord like in the middle of the piano, and then he only has one note in the bass, which is far removed. And then you have a lot of stuff going on top. So you can leave the pedal down for 1, 2, 3 measures at a time. And he knew the acoustic effect that would happen, and kind of wrote the texture to match that, to allow for that. So whether consciously or unconscious.
But, he wanted a certain effect, and that's how that's the only way you can achieve it on a piano.
Yeah, because you need to there are some really long notes that just need to be held. And so we're almost at that point. If you go back to these scalar passages that ends in measure 63, measure 64, we get that as you are baptized in Christ again, but now it's moved up to E flat minor. And so we're going up from A flat to E, we're going up a fifth or down a fourth. And then that ends similarly, and you get these gongs or these bells. And what I like is he does different types of bells. So if you think of the traditional, Russian church, you can think of the Saint Basilica, or even that's the one in St. Petersburg. I forgot the full name, but with those Russian cupolas, the beautiful round tops with all the ornateness and all the beautiful colors. And so you've got the big bells, very large bells, which are going to be low. And you've got the medium-sized bells, and you've got the higher bells, and maybe the very high bells. And he incorporates all the different sizes of bells here. So you've got this starting in measure, what is this here, 79, 80, like measure 81. You've got this bum, 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 bum. So that's setting the two large bells, kind of. And then bum, 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 bum in the middle. That's maybe a smaller part, but it's triplets, so it's kind of moving you along. And then it gets into groups of 4. And those are the higher bells, while you're still getting those bum, bum, bum as the pedal tones. And so you have all these layers of bells. And then, just like you mentioned before, he inserts that promenade theme in the top of the high bells. So the high bells, if you kind of split them into like a chord, 3 notes, and then repeats in 2 different registers, 2 different octaves, the top note of those 3 notes, in this case in E flat. C, B flat, E flat, no, da, da, F, B flat, da, G. So he's got that theme coming off there, and it's marked forte, but then it builds, and keeps growing. And actually, in the piano score, you've got 3 staves for a couple measures, because you've got so many things going on, and so that builds to like a second.
That's always
climax.
Exciting to see when you're playing.
It's like Rachmaninoff when it's 4 staves,
right?
in the famous prelude. But you have all these build-ups, and then in the first 2 instances, like at the beginning of the piece, you kind of build up, and you get that theme of the as you are baptized in Christ. Then you have like another outburst, triumphant outburst. Then you have that theme again coming in, as you are baptized in Christ. Then you have these bells start, the Russian bells. And then that really leads to another big crash bang moment. You have this huge cascading scale, which goes from an A flat. I think it's the highest A flat in the piano. Let me see. Yeah. And then all the way to the lowest C, basically in the entire piano, with this scale, A flat scale coming down. And then you get the main great gate theme coming in, but in the manner of the bells. Dun, 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 like that. And it's just so amazing. Now, here's a section where in my recording, I do what's called a hemiola effect, or just 2 verses 3 kind of thing. You start to it is in 3, dum bum bum bum, and then dun 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 dun. You kind of switch back and forth between the feeling of being in 3, a meter of 3, and feeling a meter of 2. So what I do is I do 2 verses 3, like a group of 2 in the right. I forgot if it's in the right hand or left hand, and the 3 in the other hand. To kind of get that syncopation thing. That adds a little momentum. But I did that in this recording, I believe. I don't do that now. I do more what he wrote. So you get the effect of a group of 3 for a while, and then groups of 2. So dun 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 da 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 dun 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 da 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 da. And this is such an extended place, and then it right around measure 136, it kind of gets to a static place, but there's still rumblings underneath, still building up. And then it goes into higher register, and you're still building. I mean, the amount of buildup in this piece.
Well, I was just going to say, playing this has got to be kind of a nightmare because, I mean, obviously a good composer knows how to build little breaths, here and there. But if you're just building and building and building, like you have to learn how to subtly not build so you can build to go somewhere with it.
Yeah. Well, I think he has those little spots and interludes, and this longest at the end, flourish or whatever, rush to the finish, race to the finish. There are still moments built in where register changes and that hemiola effect, and then he does bring it back to mezzo forte before the last big buildup, which is over the course of 20 or 30 measures or something. Mezzo forte crescendo for a while, forte crescendo, and then it's poco a poco rallentando. So you're really stretching this out, and this is over the entire span of the keyboard. You're just flat, large chords, and going to C flat major. So E flat, and you get the flat 6. And, Tchaikovsky did that kind of thing a lot. 1 flat 6, which I love that progression. If you listen to his symphonies or, even in the concerti. And Mussorgsky does this too. So it's just a very powerful moment. And you think those are the biggest chords. I'm looking at like measure 156. And then still in measure 61, 2, measures 162, you've got grave, sempre allargando, still broadening, and whole notes with an ornament or pickup. And
so real quick, just so for those for those non-musicians, explain the Italian you just said.
Grave, I mean grave. It's just a very slow tempo. We were basically at a menomosto or maestoso, which is majestic, a little bit less motion. Menomosto is less motion. And then we have this poco a poco, little by little, rallentando, where you're stretching out, you're really stretching the notes, and then allargando, really stretching, slowing down. Sempre is always. So you've really put on the brakes here. And this is the final, I'm looking at the final 15 measures or whatever. And it's fortissimo, it's in common time. So we're at the most stable we can be. This whole piece, we've talked about the meters changing and the promenade and 5/4, 6/4, 7/4 added. Now all of a sudden we're in 4/4. This is very stable harmonies. E flat major. It's just like, it's so melodramatic in a way, but it's not cheesy. I feel
it's not cheesy. It's you know what I mean. This is a cheesy version of what I'm about to say. Is it reminds me a little bit at the end of the John Williams score, the Star Wars. Like it's got this big triumphant slow. This is important, and we're gonna stand here and enjoy this moment for a little bit. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's kind of how it is. It's almost a Hollywood moment, not quite Disney moment, but yes,
Right.
Star Warsy. But with this one, there are so many layers and things that have built up to. I guess Star Wars 2 has quite a story behind it, but this one I think is much deeper and
right,
much stronger and more powerful, and so you're ending on these big chords. Da, da, da,
well,
da, da, da.
you know what it is like? It is like I mentioned the Ode to Joy before, where you come to the Ode to Joy at this point. But another thing I think about is for again kind of non-musicians. Think about the Lord of the Rings, those movies, those 3 movies, and at the end, it felt like it ended for 45 minutes. The ending was just like one ending, then another ending, then it kept ending. But you had to realize you weren't ending a 2.5 hour movie. You were ending this 9-hour epic
saga. Yeah.
Right. And this is kind of the same feeling that once you've gone through this whole thing, this is the payoff that you've been kind of waiting for.
Yeah. And it's funny we talk about the endings. I happen to think people like Beethoven and Tchaikovsky just draw out the endings so long, sometimes way too long. And there's I don't know if you've ever heard of Dudley Moore. Have you seen him? Yeah, he has a very funny video, and this is in the era of Victor Borge too. I mean, these were 2 of the early piano comedians, and he does this thing where he's ending a Beethoven sonata, per se, a made-up one, and I think in C minor. He just goes back and for like 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 1 1 1 5 5 5. Like, oh my god,
right.
And then goes to 1 1 5 5 6 da 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 5 1.
That's hilarious.
So I think those composers generally they maybe have too long. This I think is totally merited. I mean, it's the build up to the harmonic tension and the harmonic pacing has been very good, and we don't feel that it's unwarranted. So but it's big. So he ends here, and then a lot of these slight false endings, but then finally it's E flat for 4 measures in a row and a big tremolo and then a big octave at the end and a release. So it is a real rush to play this movement, certainly the end.
And when you come off, when you finish a work like this, like you played it, I'm sure you always look back at things you want to do better. Like at that point, when you're in the glow of the moment, I mean, that's got to just be a rush. Like
it is. Else. Yeah, I don't think non-musicians. We could spend another podcast on psychology of performance and the rush and the feelings that we get. I've sometimes compared it to. Or the nervousness that we have, stage fright. We talk about that a lot. Everybody says that they have stage fright, and it's worse than others. Look at the greatest, like Horowitz. He left the stage for 12 years because he was nervous about performing, and that's when people were getting more critical, and recordings were coming out, and it's very nerve-wracking to perform today. And when you can get through something like that, that just adds to the euphoric nature. I mean, when I end this piece, first of all, I'm exhausted. And I tell people, too, how much of a physical exercise it is to play a recital. Usually after a recital, I drink about 1 liter of water. That's the amount of water I've just lost in terms of energy.
People don't realize what an athlete you have to be to play these kind of pieces.
Yeah. I mean, you lose a lot just in the physical energy, but the emotional strain and psychological energy, which you just don't get in sports. I mean, I played competitive sports up to a pretty high level. My father was very high. He was on the Swedish Olympic team, and he was one of in the 1960s he didn't break or hold a world record, but he was very close, and he was one of the first 20 in the world to jump. He did high jump to jump 7 feet. And so we have that tradition, and I know how important sports are and the psychology of them. And when you're gearing up for a game, you get nervous, the butterflies in the stomach. But once you start playing, I played competitive tennis, table tennis, soccer, and you're fine. Yeah, of course there's pressure, but that heightened pressure actually helps you perform better. You can, as you can run faster when you're under that kind of pressure. Same thing with piano, by the way. If you can channel that sort of nervous energy into a positive way, you can do a lot of things. And I've done things in performance that I've never done in practice. And there are a couple elements. One is your heart rate is faster. You just have more blood pumping. And the other thing is when you're nervous, your sense of time, time we think of as a very standardized or objective concept, and it's not actually. Time is not objective. Our perception of time, rather, is not objective. So when you're playing and you mess up, you miss a note or something, and I've done this many times.
That lasts 10 minutes.
Yeah, you're scrambling for it. You're like, oh my God, everybody's watching. The amount of things that go to through your head at that speed, it's amazing. You think it lasts forever, and then you listen to the recording later, and you're like, oh, that was like a second and a half.
Right.
And it's still not good, and you can tell, but it is really tough to get back on the concentration mobile. And so all that said, when you put in all that work and that effort, and then you've finished and culminated to something like this, it's really euphoric. I mean, it is amazing. I have such a high after concerts that we talk about the artist's life too, and my schedule is just later than most. And of course, people chat, oh, you should go to bed early and do this. It's like, well, how many concerts do you go to that are at 4 p.m.? Usually you go to a concert at 7, 8 p.m. Now, do you think the artist goes home like you do? No, they probably talk with a lot of fans or people after the concert. They're talking with stage managers. Then they might go eat because they're famished. So when I play a concert even 7:30 or a lot of times at 8, I don't eat dinner till 10 or 10:30. And then I'm exhausted after that, but I'm still on a high. So it's just a different lifestyle, and and your brain chemistry is altered a lot. So anyway, back to how do I compare this to the average, in everyday life? I think one of the only, it's not quite a fair comparison, but one of the only fields that can really compare to the nervousness and how that affects the body and the euphoria as well is battle, is a soldier. When somebody goes to war, that kind of extended nervousness, and when it's really serious, and we're not going to, if I mess up a note in a concert, I'm not going to die. That's the main difference. But that feeling of being,
but the concentration level, like the level to play a piece and to keep a level of concentration for 30 plus minutes is remarkable, because I was just, in fact, another comparison. I was talking to my son. He just looked up. He said, "Hey, did you know that master chess players, burn 6,000 calories on an average chess match?" Yeah, we can get makes sense.
Yeah, I don't. A little different nervousness with chess, which we can get into, but the fact that music is a field that moves, that is in time.
It's dynamic.
It's dynamic. It's not like the visual arts where you can paint a wonderful painting and not paint for the rest of your life, or even paint crap for the rest of your life, and you can still be known as a great artist. Like, that's a beautiful painting. It's a great painting. He was a great artist for that. You can play a wonderful concert and then play 50 bad concerts and you're known as a bad pianist. Yes. Inconsistent pianist. And that kind of, we don't realize the psychological toll of being judged is like, and I wish we had that. This gets back to why I think music, one of the reasons why music is so important for the study of it, for general citizenship. The things that we learn through music, we cannot pick up through other things. I guess public speaking is similar, but I don't think the rigors of public speaking are the same. I mean, you're using words. We know the words. You can make up words. It's very hard to just make up. We're not trying to improvise so much, which is perhaps something that's lacking. But it's really tough if you have a mind slip and you're just really being judged. And so, yes, it's not the same as being literally killed or potentially shot at. But
your reputation is, and in some traditions, that's almost the same.
Yeah, the ego really takes a beating. And it's very hard for people to not only do, but to continually do. And that's why I've come around a lot in my own, I guess, what am I trying to say? But the way I view other pianists, or my judgment in the way I judge other pianists, I feel, boy, they've gotten up there and they've performed this many times, and it's every time it's hard and it's a struggle. And so kudos to them for at least that part of it. Then we can talk about other things.
And I have to add one other thing about a pianist specifically, because this is another thing most people don't really get.
Mhm.
is, if you play the violin, for example, obviously there's differences with weather and conditions, but you're playing the same violin every single time.
Uh-huh.
When you play a concert, you're playing a different piano. As a pianist, you're playing a different piano every time. It's set up different. It sounds different. It's in a different hall. I mean, everything is like a new experience.
Yeah, that's a big part of performing too. And it is, at least in piano circles, something we train with,
Right.
in others, with other musicians. I think it's something that's, again, not intentionally overlooked. It's just not part of what they worry about. Of course, when I played violin too, and I played for 20 years, I occasionally played on my friend's violin or my stand partner. We'd switch violins for a little bit.
But you wouldn't play a performance.
Probably not. No, I'd use my violin. Hopefully you would be good enough and comfortable enough to sort of switch. And also with the piano, with these big artists, hopefully they're playing in nice halls with very good instruments, so that the instruments are fairly homogeneous.
Uniform.
So they're more uniform. Yeah. And that's what you get. Even with all the, let's say the top 10 brands, they're all going to be fantastic instruments. But I don't have as big a career as someone like Zimmerman, so I can't be as picky and choosy. And I've played on just some, what we call PSOs, not POS, PSO, piano-shaped object. I mean, they're just, and funny enough, one of the stories that I have another story from my professor, but when we talk about like playing in the trenches, I played at a retirement home. It was with a group, friends of mine. They were doing a fundraising event, and I said, yeah, sure, I'll be part of that fundraising event. I'll play something, and whatever money we raised went towards this thing. And it was at a retirement home, and maybe a poor one, but the piano there, it was an old upright, and it was just against the wall. And I was like, well, nobody can see it there. Can't we move it? Well, can't move it because it was so rickety. The wheels were broken. If you move that thing, broke. So okay, we'll leave it in the corner. Let's listen to the piano. Well, some of the keys were broken. So some of the white keys were missing that. It was an old piano, so had ivory tops. And it was missing that ivory piece on top. So it was just wood, a little bit, like 1 millimeter below the others. And then some of the black keys also were missing. So you can't play the black keys because they're at the same level of the white keys. You'd have to stick your finger in. So a couple black keys were broken, 1 or 2 white keys were missing, and then piano was way out of tune. And some strings were broken, and the pedal was broken. And I mean, you can't play on a worse instrument than that. But I played two or three pieces, and one of those pieces was Scriabin Etude, which has a lot of black notes in it.
Wow!
And so I managed. I kind of made it as good as I could, and I guess produce as much sound as I could from that vantage point, so that people way in the back of it was just in the reception hall downstairs, so that they could hear. And I thought it was crap, but they all loved it. And then there's another couple who played in that concert as well. The wife played the piano. She was a music director at a church. She's an amateur musician, and her husband was also an amateur kind of flutist. Well, I should say she had training as a musician. I mean, she did organ and piano and other things, and directed musicals, directed choirs, but sort of a multi-talented. It wasn't like she went for a piano performance degree. So she could play piano and he could play flute. And she had a heck of a time, and told me later, I had a heck of a time controlling that piano and playing anything on it. It was so crappy. And so after first hearing me, I think she probably thought, oh, he's good. He can play. And then after playing the piano herself, she realized how good I was because of what I could do with the piano. And that turned into a long-standing relationship with me and the church where she was a music director, because they invited me for multiple concerts. I think over the course of my time in Montreal, I played 8 or 9 concerts there, sometimes solo, sometimes with my duo partner, Roland, violinist, once or twice with, once with my trio, and then once with Jess, with my piano duo partner. So, I mean, that turned into a wonderful affair, having played on that horrible piano. So this is to go back to your original idea that, we've got to adapt and play whatever we can and keep that music as our goal, and keep that in our ear when we're playing whatever instrument.
Well, and that's the other thing. Like, no matter how good or bad the piano is, no matter how good or bad you play, because of the nature of music, it's never perfect. It's the striving for perfection that is almost gives meaning to what we do as musicians.
Yeah, that's important too. Again, I'm going to take that point and say another reason to study music, become a good citizen, is the idea of striving towards something. I mean, how many of us lament our kids that our kids don't work as hard as we did, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Every generation says that. And they don't know the meaning of hard work and fulfillment in the end. I mean, that is the story of learning a piano. It's a long-term goal, and it takes many years to perfect something. You cannot just take a few online lessons. And I have adults that, they do that. And that's why the online lessons are so popular. It's like, well, I just want to learn how to play this one piece. This Beatles song, and then that's all I want. And just tell me how to play it. Like, well, okay, I mean, I just play these chords, but how do you? Well, I want to play it better. Well, okay, that takes a lot of work and a lot of training, and it's not simple, and that takes years of practice and honing different techniques and skills. Just as it would in many other fields, but in music, you see that struggle, and you have to deal with it on a weekly, on a monthly, on a yearly basis.
I think it was. Important. I think it was Horowitz. I may be messing up the quote, but I think somebody said something to the lines of, when, how often do you practice, or what happens when you don't practice? And his quote was something to the effect of, well, after one day of not practicing, I notice. After a week, my wife notices. And after a month, the world notices. Yeah,
I think it was him or Paderewski or something. It's like after one day I notice, 2 days the critics notice, and 3 days the public.
Right.
So, yeah.
And it is true. It is that way. It is an art that you can. I mean, you can get it. But, it is like riding a bike, but at the same time, like, to keep that kind of, it is like being an athlete, a very focused athlete that you have got to stay on the ball. You can't get fat and happy.
Right. Yeah. It's a nice thing too, is that it's the longest kind of career you can have. So in terms of the athletic approach, it's a very physical thing to play piano.
Right.
You really are using your whole body. And if you play correctly, you're using your lower body, support upper body, and larger motions. We talk about that a lot. It's not just about the finger. The finger is the last thing the audience sees. So they always, your fingers are so fast and strong. And yeah, they're stronger because I've supported them with all the rest of my body.
Right.
And you wouldn't have an elite athlete and say, okay, take a couple weeks off before this big game. No, of course not. You're going to practice, and you're going to keep that body in shape and hone everything you can. And then you can't just be like, well, I did that really good game, last year. So this year I don't really have to practice hard. You're not going to be good.
What have you done for me lately, baby?
Yeah, you're not going to be good. So yeah, that's part of it. And the other, sorry, go ahead, because
go ahead.
Reminded of something, and now I can't. No, but what was I going to say? You said something else that sparked an idea, but it will come to me later.
Yeah. Well, I did want to just what I was going to say is I've really appreciated you being our tour guide through this piece of work. It has been just really exciting for me to get to know it a lot better. I think, and to introduce it hopefully to lots more people that will hear this recording and hear your passion for it, and have a desire to listen to it. For those who play, maybe to sit down and learn a little bit of it, but just appreciate what the thought. And I think that's one thing, like we talk about laymen, people who don't understand like the sincere thought and care that goes into writing, composing, playing a work like this is just incredible. And I appreciate the amount of detail that you've gone into discussing that with us this series.
Yeah. Oh, it's been a great pleasure for me. It's actually enabled me to brush up on some of my old, on my thesis and some of the old stuff that I'd written about, and even think about it in a new way and tie it into so many other ideas that we've touched on. It's really been a nice journey. So I hope we do more of this stuff in the future.
Oh, I'm thrilled. Twist my rubber arm, Elias. I'm game. Let's do it.
Okay.
Awesome, well, before we sign off, is there anything that you'd like to add? Any final notes that you'd like to add about this or anything we've discussed?
No, I mean, this has been so much fun to go through, and I just get excited talking about this piece and all the other topics we have. You know, we're both musicians, and we're basically we're emissaries kind of for what we see are such important attributes of being human. And I think music is one of those highest attributes and one of the things that brings out the best in us. And I think it merits serious study like we've done. So I hope people, musicians and non-musicians, are listening to this series of podcasts and getting a lot out of it and learning something about themselves through the medium of music and through this particular piece.
Oh, well said. Beautiful. I appreciate that. This is Mike Levitt. I'm with Dr. Elias-Axel Pettersson. This has been And If Love Remains. You can find out more about Elias at www.eapettersson.com. And as always, you can check out the podcast here at www.andifloveremains.com. Thanks for joining us on our journey, and we'll see you next time.